Hi, everyone. I see people are starting to trickle in, so I just want to welcome everyone to this RNS virtual event. I'm Niala Boodhoo. I'm an RNS events executive producer, and I'm going to be moderating the conversation today with our great panel that we have assembled from Rome. So as I let folks trickle in, I just want to thank everybody for attending. And just let everybody know, actually, while you're here, if you can let us know in the chat where you're joining from, that would be great. And we can kind of start to welcome people from all over. Um, by the way, also, we are going to be taking questions towards the end of this event. So you can also put your questions in the chat. And our RNS producers are going to be monitoring that during our event today. We'll get to as many questions as we can. Oh, this is so great to see people logging in from all across the US so far, from Missouri and Minnesota and Connecticut, New Jersey, Washington State. This is great. Welcome, everyone. So thanks for putting all of that in, and continue to put in where you're coming from as we welcome other folks into this event. Just a note to everyone, this event is being recorded. So I just wanted to note that, and we will be sharing this from tomorrow for everyone. And this is the first of a series of virtual events that RNS is going to be doing this summer, which will be leading up to our in-person fall symposium. This is actually what we're calling a breaking news virtual event, but we also have a regularly scheduled event that's coming up on May 20th. We are going to be talking about the religious lawsuits filed against the Trump administration. And our guests are going to be presiding Bishop of the Episcopal Church, Sean Rowe, and director of the Latino Christian National Network, the Reverend Carlos Malave, and the director of the Law, Rights, and Religion Project at Columbia, Elizabeth Reiner Platt. So we will pop a link in the chat if you are interested in that to register. That will be on May 20th. I know a lot of you have been reading the excellent coverage that RNS has been doing of not just Pope Francis's passing, but now this conclave. We will also put, we have a special page where we've been putting all of this coverage, and we'll put that link in the chat as well for you so you can bookmark it. I am here in Washington, D.C., but I am so excited to be joined by our RNS folks who have been doing so much of the reporting that makes up that site. They, of course, are in Rome, where the conclave officially begins tomorrow. We know there's so much to unpack here about what's to be expected, how RNS is planning to cover this. Of course, as I said, we will be taking your questions, so go ahead and start to put those in the chat too. And without further ado, let me welcome our excellent panel joining us from Rome, where they have been a little busy. RNS Vatican reporter Claire Giangravé is with us. Hi, Claire.
Hello.
RNS's Aleja Hertzler-McCain, who covers Latino and American Catholicism, is also with us. Hi, Aleja.
Hello, I'm out here on the street in Rome, so sorry I can't have my camera on.
That's all right. We appreciate you being here. And Father Tom Reese, a Jesuit priest who's been an RNS senior analyst and contributor since 2017. He's also the author of Inside the Vatican, the Politics and Organization of the Catholic Church. Father Tom, thank you for being with us too.
Great to be with you.
Can we just start with you all setting the scene for us? Claire, can you just tell us what the mood is like in Rome right now?
It's just so exciting to be here. I mean, especially me, but all of us who are covering the church have been here for years, listening to cardinals priests talk, bishops talk, going to conferences and events, and now they're all the whole church all over the world is all in Rome at this moment. And so it's been both an emotional thing, just seeing the tremendous expression of love and affection after the death of Pope Francis, but also such a thrilling thing to see all these years of work and conversations and knowledge come together at this moment. And it's just every time I walk down towards the Vatican, I see someone I know, a face I've interviewed, a person who has some story that they've told me. So it's really one of those moments where just the whole world is watching the Vatican, and what we do every day just seems to matter even more.
Thanks for that, Claire. Father Tom, this is, if I'm right, your third conclave. Is that correct?
Yes.
So can you tell us what, like, if this is, I wonder if you can compare, like, if you think back to the day before the previous conclave, like what sort of, if you can kind of describe for us what this is like, if this one feels different?
Well, in many ways, it's the same because it's so exciting, as Claire mentioned. The Pope plays such a huge role in the Catholic Church. So who gets elected will have an impact on the Church for years into the future. It's a little bit different from previous conclaves. For example, prior to the conclave that elected Benedict, we all knew he was going to get elected. It's more like the conclave that elected Francis. We don't have a clue who's going to get elected. So we're all excited to see how it goes. The other big change is that this conclave is the largest conclave in the history of the Church. There are 133 cardinals in the Sistine Chapel who are going to vote to select the new Pope. We've never had that many people in a conclave. And they don't know each other. They had to wear name tags.
That's what I was going to say. They're wearing name tags.
Yeah, I mean, this is really bizarre. So they got to get to know each other before they can actually vote and pick the man that they think is best suited to be Pope.
And I want to get into that whole process, but Aleja, I first just wanted to ask you, as someone who is based in the US, has gone to Rome to cover this, what's the Vatican press office like right now?
Yeah, it's become, especially, I think even the last 24 hours, you see so many more people and so much more of like a zoo-like environment, I guess I'd say. Like it's just really busy. I think it's also just really interesting. I would have imagined that the Vatican press office or the Vatican would be kind of like the UN, where a lot of languages are spoken, and really almost everything is happening in Italian. So just to see like the global church speak so many languages, and certainly the cardinals speak a lot of languages. But it's interesting that, you know, press conferences or, you know, all of the interactions with the press office are very much happening in Italian.
So I wanted to get back to the number of electors. And actually, this is great. We had a question from Bill who was asking, Father Tom, is the number 133? What is the number of conclave voters that we have, actually? I don't know, Father Tom or Claire, who wants to answer that one before we get into where they come from?
Well, originally it was 135 that we were expecting, but 2 of the cardinals called in sick. So they're not coming to the conclave. So we're down to 133 cardinals from all over the world, every race, every culture. It's going to be an extraordinary meeting of people trying to communicate with each other and trying to understand each other and pick a pope for the Catholic Church.
What language does that happen in?
Well, in the Sistine Chapel itself, there is no talking. The only talking in the Sistine Chapel is the counting of the votes. And when each cardinal comes up and swears that he will vote for the person that he thinks before God is the one that should be Pope. So much of that is in Latin, you know, old formulas that have been around for centuries. But now outside of the Sistine Chapel, where all the discussion and debate is, it's in multiple languages. And this is interesting because there's no translators there. So cardinals are going to have to translate for each other into the languages that they don't know. So if an American
This is like a dumb question, but Father, I guess they don't have like phones. They can't use like Google Translate.
No.
Right. So they really are. Okay. Claire, yeah, go ahead, Father Tom.
The very term conclave means locked in with a key, and they have to turn in their cell phones, no internet, no newspapers, no radio, no television, total isolation from the outside world, so that they don't know what's happening outside and we don't know what's happening inside.
Claire, what else do we need to know? I wonder if you can just sort of take a step back. Father Tom was talking about the Sistine Chapel. Can you just tell us what we know about the process, which in some ways, like there's some things we don't know about it, right?
Yes, well, one thing I wanted to point out about the languages, which I think is kind of interesting and to always keep in mind, is that if you might be seeing around these lists of what we call papabili, so people who could become a pope, The way these lists are also made is taking into account how many languages those cardinals speak, because the ability to speak many languages and to be understood by other prelates is so important, not only in the days leading up to conclave, but then within the conclave itself. So that's a really good question to ask. The language issue has always been there, and even more now that Latin is not the language that is spoken by most prelates. But regarding the process of the conclave, well, on Wednesday it's going to start. It starts with a mass. It's a special mass. It's called Pro Eligendo Pontefice, to elect the Pope, where the cardinals and the church all come together asking God essentially to help them make the best decision for the church. And this will be an important mass. There will be a homily. And then after that, the cardinals are going to go and have lunch, probably their last good lunch they're going to have in a while. And we won't see them again until the afternoon, where they meet up again and they meet at the Cappella Paolina. Now, you've all heard of the Sistine Chapel, painted by Michelangelo. We've seen it in movies, probably in Conclave recently. But the Cappella Paolina is really close by, and it was also painted by Michelangelo, and it shows the death of Peter and Paul, the apostles. And so they're going to meet in there, and they're going to have a small meeting, gathering ceremony, and then a procession that will follow a very specific order that is based on the rank and time when a cardinal was ordained. I don't know how much detail you want, but it's obviously very studied. I think that's important for everyone to know. Every single detail of these various passages has a meaning and significance and its symbolism behind it. And they walk all together until they reach the Sistine Chapel. Now, the cameras will be following them throughout the whole processions, where they'll be making the litany of saints, songs to call on Christ and the saints to help them. And then the doors are closed behind them. And there is a final sort of presentation. I wouldn't say presentation. I'm thinking of the Italian word right now, but
What's the Italian word?
Predica, which is sort of
Homily.
it's a homily, but in this case, it's almost a bit of an admonition also to urge the cardinals to remember why they're there and the spiritual meaning of the decision that they're going to make. And Cardinal Raniero Cantalamessa is going to be the one doing that, but we won't know what he says or what happens. And then he and the others who accompany him will exit the Sistine Chapel. The doors will be solemnly closed, and we will hear the words extra omnes, which means everyone must leave. And that's when the cardinals will start voting for who will be the next pope. And we might have a first vote. Actually, we will have a first vote right on Wednesday, although few really believe that we're going to get the white smoke that first day. And when I say white smoke, it's because they place in the Sistine Chapel, they're not there all the time. They do this only for the conclave. Two furnaces, is that the right term, Father Tom, or ovens?
Stoves, yeah.
Stoves within the Sistine Chapel. And they put a chimney right on top of the Sistine Chapel that can be seen from the square. So faithful who know the times of the day when the chimney might show smoke can go there and see. And if it's black smoke, that means that they haven't selected a pope. And if it's white smoke, then all the people gathered in St. Peter's Square know that within 20 minutes to an hour, when it was Pope Francis, Pope will be coming out of the loggia and saying, and we'll hear Abemus Papam, and there will be the first greeting to the crowd. And the ovens are two, because one is for the black smoke and the other one is for the white smoke. And there's no way of telling how long this process takes. But as Father Tom said, it takes as much time as it's required. And we really don't know the conversations that happen there. And they're very secretive.
So do we have any sense of how long this is going to take? I don't know if you guys want to guess or no.
Well, we haven't had a conclave last more than 5 days since the 19th century. That's since 1830, when a conclave actually lasted a month. So we would most people are expecting that we will have a pope by Friday evening.
Yes, and if they don't have one by Friday evening, then the rules of the Vatican require that after 3 days of voting, or actually 12 votes, so that's a little different from the hours of the day, but after 12 votes, they have 2 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon, then the cardinals are invited to take a day to just sort of reflect and think. And the dean of the College of Cardinals makes a sort of speech saying, come on, let's start figuring out names. And then, they come back. So we're not sure if that day will be Saturday or Sunday, but Some of the cardinals we're talking to, and Aleja, I'm sure, can testify to this as well, think that it will be a short conclave. So that could be anything between 3 and 5 days.
Aleja, I
Yes,
do want
it's
to hear from you
interesting.
on
Oh,
that. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Aleja.
I was
No, go
gonna
ahead.
say Claire and I have been asking cardinals how long the conclave will be, like every day on the street, and each day they have a bit of a different answer. I think a few days ago there was a little bit more uncertainty about the length of the conclave. Today, cardinals were a little more positive and certain that this would be not too short, but not too long, kind of. So yeah, I think the timeline Father Tom laid out is probably a good guess, but of course you can never be certain.
So Aleja, I want to go back to you in a second. Go ahead, Father Tom.
I was just going to say, the thing you have to remember is that they need a 2/3 vote of the conclave to elect a pope. And sometimes what happens historically is you have two factions and neither of them can get the 2/3 vote. And then what they have to do is look for a compromise, look for somebody else, somebody that both sides can accept. Maybe it's not their first choice, but they can accept this person and elect them. And that, so sometimes the front runners fall by the wayside because they can't get the 2/3 vote they need.
So what do you think, are there two, like, is it fair to say there are two factions right now already that we know of?
I
I
don't think so. I'd love to hear Claire's view on this also. I think it's a lot more complicated than that. You know, we Americans, we always say liberal, conservative. Well, it's just much more complicated than that. We have people from so many different cultures and backgrounds that are coming here. This is really the universal church with a lot of different views. I think the overwhelming majority of them liked Pope Francis. After all, 80% of them were appointed by Pope Francis. So we're going to see a lot of continuity. But of course, we're never going to see anybody like Pope Francis because there's nobody like him in the college. So it could be a very different kind of personality. But I'd love to hear what Claire has to say.
I mean, everything you said is absolutely on point. I mean, we know that there's some top contenders, right? Every time there is an election, the Secretary of State at the Vatican, so that's the #2 official at the Vatican, is considered a sort of evergreen candidate just because of the role and recognizability of that role, of that
And
position.
who is that now, Claire?
It's Cardinal Pietro Parolin. So you've probably heard this name. He's on every list of papabile. And there's good reason for that. He is a diplomat. He's someone who has had a lot of experience running the church. But against him, he hasn't had a lot of pastoral experience. Some people think that he doesn't have the smell of the sheep, as Pope Francis would have put it. That means he hasn't spent a lot of time just with ordinary faithful. And so that might mean what Tom was hinting at before, which is sort of beyond just the general facts. If there isn't a quick decision, then even if we're outside, we can say, oh, now things are starting to get a little bit more complicated, because if you're not going to get the votes by the second or third time, then at that point, people are going to start reconsidering their choices. And that we have some people who are in the list of those second choices. I don't know if you've heard of Cardinal Tagle from the Philippines or Cardinal Erdo, Hungarian. And yes, as Father Tom was saying, you could try and place them in ideological sides and camps of the church. And I'd love to hear any questions about that without getting into much detail now. But there is always the fact that if one guy gives a really amazing speech in there, someone who we haven't really thought about or recognized, but this conclave of strangers, as it's been described, is going to come together and they're going to hear someone who says something that really resonates with people, then that could be the guy. And it could be that fourth candidate that no one ever expected. And that's kind of the allure of the conclave, the unpredictability of it.
So Claire had a good reminder for our audience. Please go ahead and start dropping your questions in the chat if you want to. Aleja, can I ask you, on Sunday, we heard many members of the conclave giving homilies across Rome. What did we learn from that? I know you and Claire, Father Tom, everybody was kind of fanned out looking at all of those. There was a lot of different activity happening this Sunday.
Sure. Yeah, it was interesting to see, I think, where members of the press showed up for those homilies. Certainly where I was at, which was Peter Erdo, the Hungarian cardinal, who's seen as maybe a more conservative pick, or that conservative cardinals might get behind him. His mass was very well attended by press. Claire ended up at a church with Cardinal Mbongo Basungu, who uh, had only, like, I think 3 reporters there. So, you know, there's a little bit you can tell just by where people are showing up, when it might be happening, and then also which cardinals are open to speaking with the press and which aren't. Peter Erdo was, I would call him like literally tight-lipped, trying not to even like greet the press going in or out of the mass, whereas Claire had a quite long interview. And then in the homilies themselves, they were all preaching on the same gospel passage, because of course all the churches are reading the same gospel passage, which is the same one that came from Pope Francis' funeral, about feed my flock. And so what feeding the flock looks like for all of these different cardinals tells you a little bit about the vision for the church. And it also, some may be in those homilies giving pointed answers about, oh, we want someone who has these qualities, or yeah, so that we.
Yeah, so I see we have a question which gets to something that I wanted to ask you all about, which is just what you think are the biggest issues of the day as we start to think about these contenders. Like, what are the Cardinals going to be thinking about as they enter into this process about what they feel like the church needs?
Should I
Who
start?
wants to? Yeah, you start, Claire.
I'll throw the conversation, but I'm really inviting Aleja and Tom to jump in and let's talk it out, because I think we've been having these conversations a lot. I'm just thinking about today, for example, the Cardinals issued a statement from within the general congregations. These are meetings that they have leading up to the conclave, where Cardinals have an opportunity to speak to the whole College of Cardinals. That includes voting, so under the age of 80, and non-voting, those over the age of 80. And it's a bit of a forum to figure out what the moods and sensations and ideas are. And during this the congregation today, which was the last one, they issued a statement calling for peace, and they mentioned especially war in Ukraine and in the Middle East. This period that starts sede vacante, it's an empty seat, literally in Latin, between the death of a pope and the election of another, started with very strong political and in terms of like international war and conflict sort of happening. This is always the case. It's nothing new for the church, but it's something that they obviously have on their mind. Pope Francis, right until he died, he was speaking every day to a parish in Gaza. During his funeral, we saw the President Trump sit in front of President Zelensky and have, talking about the war in Ukraine. I mean, obviously the Cardinals know that whoever they appoint needs to be someone who can speak with credibility and in a way that is compelling to what is happening in the world, to the conflicts and to the conflicts that are taking place. And so that is something that is obviously playing, happening inside their head. And then Aleja mentioned something really smart earlier, and I know it's not as fun and political, but it's true. For the third time since the Pope died, they've heard this reading where Jesus asks his disciples to feed my flock and to take care of the sheep. It's such an eerie thing that he chose that as the reading for his funeral, and then they heard it again on the last day of the 9 days of mourning of his death, not once but twice, because they had to go to their own churches, as Aleja was saying, and reflect on it while they were writing a homily, and then at the same time afterwards going for the last day of Francis's funeral, mass, remembrance mass, and hear that again one more time. I mean, the Cardinals have to make a tough choice, because Tom was saying something that a lot of people, that is really inside the conclave. It's, you don't really have a cardinal who has all the great qualities that they're looking for. Some people are saying we need someone who's super smart, super talented, with great charisma, who knows everything about the church and is also a fantastic manager. That unicorn doesn't really exist, not even among the College of Cardinals. And so for them to have heard that homily so often, I think is weighing so much on their mind. I'm sort of picking up in conversation on and off the record. Do we should we lean more for like the reformer, someone who will fix the problems in the church, can stand up against injustice, or should we go for someone who instead has the smell of the sheep, as Francis would say, who is really charismatic, can draw more and more people into this moment? I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I
Well,
agree
I
with
was, oh,
I agree with Claire, absolutely. I mean, we want this perfect person. I mean, it's Jesus Christ with an MBA from Harvard as Pope, and you know, he's not available. But I think that it's going to be really interesting because Francis was so charismatic, and you know,
And so public facing, right? Like his was
uh,
someone who captured the imagination of people outside, like he was truly a global figure.
yes, and we we have had charismatic popes before, and we've had dull popes before. I mean, Pius XII was kind of dull. John the 23rd was very charismatic. Paul VI was a bit dull, but he got a lot of things done. And then John
Does the
Paul comes
pendulum
along.
swing, you think, Father Tom? Like, do you think because this, like, Pope Francis was so charismatic, does that mean?
Well, that's the key question. You know, can we have a dull pope in the 21st century in the age of Twitter and social media? Or do we continue to look for a charismatic pope in the hopes that, okay, he can hire somebody to do all the management work and to run the curia, but he has to be the face of the church. He has to preach the gospel to the people.
Aleja, I want to let you weigh in before I get to some of the audience questions here.
well, I kind of thought that, and one of the audience questions did get a little bit at one of the issues we know that the cardinals are talking about, which is synodality. So it's kind of a tricky theological concept that we have been talking about for a few years. But the idea really has to do with listening, accompaniment, walking together. And it was the Synod on Synodality, a 3-year process, really involved listening to a lot of lay Catholics. And some cardinals we now know, because we've heard publicly how they felt that was kind of a threat to the hierarchy and order of the church, felt like it was a threat to the tradition of the church. So we saw a published speech that actually came in from inside the general congregations, which we're not getting all that many full published speeches, but someone must have leaked, of Cardinal Joseph Zen, who is from Hong Kong, he can't vote, he's over the age of 80, but was very against the whole process of synodality. On the other hand, we're hearing in our press briefings that synodality is coming up almost every day, and it sounds like the context we're getting there is in positive ways, so that there would be a lot of cardinals who would be in favor of what synodality has brought to the church. So I definitely think that's something they're talking about and considering as they look at their next pope.
Claire, Father Tom, do you also want to weigh in on Brian's question? And that question was, do you think the new pope will continue the process of encouraging synodality at every level of the church?
I think so, you know, but it's more or less degree. You know, one of the great sins of the church is clericalism, and I'm a cleric, and we like to be in charge. We like to run things. We like to make the decisions. It's very human and very sinful. What Pope Francis he hated clericalism, and synodality was one of his ways of dealing with it, of saying, hey, you got to listen to the people. You got to be down there with the people. And the people have to be part of the process. And you know, this is a change that I hope and pray cannot be turned around. I don't think it can. I think we've got a taste of it. But the trouble is, he only started it. It's got to get throughout the church, in every diocese and every parish where synodality is practiced. It's not just something that happens in Rome.
And how long do you think that takes, Father Tom, to make that kind
centuries.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just
what we're
jump in
talking
there.
about here is conversion. And
Yeah.
this was something that Pope Francis was very strong on, as his experience as a spiritual director and a director of seminarians. He called people to conversion, where, you know, and especially even in the Vatican Curia, where some of us thought that he should fire a few people instead, you know, who weren't open to conversion.
Yeah, I would just add that synodality is, in my understanding, a pretty controversial topic within this conclave. The majority of the cardinals really want to see it go on. But the problem is that the understanding of synodality, I mean, I've covered it now for 3 years, as Aleja was saying, and I'm still not very clear sometimes as to how exactly it manifests. And that means that different prelates, different priests, different bishops, different lay people have different ideas of what that means. So it really depends on who's going to be the next pope. I don't think that the word synodality is going to be like something that we never hear again, but how that synodality is actually enacted really all depends on who's going to take on that role. And if it's someone who wants to sort of take a step back from the opening and the dialogue and the integration of lay people giving leadership positions to lay people in the church, then it might turn into something different and might become more about giving bishops more local authority, compared to the central. But I mean, these are very churchy things. I'm very happy actually that you're asking this question, because sometimes I'm writing about synodality and I wonder if anyone even knows what I'm talking about.
Well, clearly RNS readers do, because they're asking about it.
But yes, I would just say that it is a controversial issue. It depends on who's going to be the next pope. And finally, I mean, yeah, those are the only things that we can say at this point.
Okay.
I agree
So
with,
we have about, oh, go ahead, Father Tom.
I was just going to agree with Claire totally. I'm old enough to remember after the Second Vatican Council, where the buzzword was collegiality. By the time the Vatican bureaucracy got done defining it and nuancing it, it lost its guts, it lost its spirit. And of course, that's always the danger with synodality, that the same thing could happen there. That's why.
But on a positive note, what you said earlier is so true, in the sense that once you let people in, it's hard to kick them out. I have seen women, I have seen representatives of the LGBTQ community who got a chance to meet with Pope Francis and be heard within the synodal assemblies. I don't think that after this amount of listening and visibility and finally not being pushed to the margins, the next pope can completely ignore that, because there is a world watching them, because there is a social media that is keeping an eye on them, and they're not as isolated as they were perhaps at the time of Paul VI or John the 23rd. But I will say this on a positive note, that I really am not sure you can shut this down entirely.
So we actually just have about 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure we get to all of the audience questions. So there's a question we have from Bill that says, what attention, if any, will the conclave pay to the world's deep and violent political conditions and the current advancement of authoritarianism across the globe? Can the church speak to all of that with any influence? We started to talk about that, but I want to give you guys a time to respond more deeply to that. Who wants to take that one?
All right.
Oh,
Aleja, no, you go. I want to hear from Aleja.
okay. Well, no, and I'm sure Claire has brilliant things to say. I would just say that, Cardinal Parolin, who's presumed to be the front runner, has a long history of diplomacy and kind of dealing with all of these types of issues. So he was getting what looked like an open endorsement from a Venezuelan cardinal for how he dealt with issues during his time there. And he is credited with being part of reestablishing relations between the U.S. and Cuba back in 2014 under Obama. I mean, the sheer number of global issues he has kind of been involved with is huge. So I think some people can see the approach of Vatican diplomacy and say, oh, you're too friendly with everybody. That's definitely been a criticism with Ukraine and Russia, and also with Israel and Palestine. So people definitely have their critiques of the way the Vatican approaches diplomacy, but there's no doubt that they're actively involved with it, and that the next pope will be actively involved with it.
Yeah, I agree totally. There is a real consensus, I think, among the cardinals that the Vatican, the Pope, has to be a prophet speaking for peace and justice, has to be on the side of the migrants and the refugees, on the side of defending the environment and working against global warming. This is part of the job description today, and I don't see the church backing away from that at all. I think the controversies tend to be in the area of the internal church life.
So to that point of the controversies in the internal church life, we have a question from Sherry that says, the media in our area has painted a picture of a humble and forward-thinking Pope Francis, sometimes in contrast to more conservative Catholics or people. And then it looks like she's asking, what about the idea of same-sex marriage or female clergy? Is that at all part of this conversation?
Well, I mean, if I understand the question correctly, I think that Francis's own legacy, maybe the best way to answer this is to say that it's hard to put the papacy in the American understanding of political sides. Yes, it's true. Francis was definitely very open when it came to pastoral gestures, real gestures towards representatives, for example, of the LGBTQ plus community, of women. He gave a lot of leadership positions to women inside the Vatican, of the poor. I mean, how many times have we seen him do things for the poor? His last few days were spent helping those who are incarcerated. I mean, this was what this Pope was about, really. But with the sole exception, perhaps, of changes on catechism on the death penalty and on nuclear weapons, Pope Francis really stopped short right before changing church law. And that is because for those of us who got a chance to not just study him, but also know him and travel with him and watch his reasoning and his thinking, Francis really, was a traditional Catholic at heart. I mean, even though he loved opening the door to conversations and he wanted people to sort of change his mind and challenge him on ideas, and he really did that in many ways, he held, a position that was against ordaining women, for example. And in the end, when the question of, for example, women deacons being allowed within the church was really getting momentum towards the end of the synod, it was Francis who shut it down and said that the church is not yet mature for this kind of reflection. And so at the same time, we have, for example, the Vatican Department for the Doctrine of the Faith issuing a document that allows couples who are in same-sex relationships to be blessed by priests. And then we see them backpedaling and sort of going back on that, allowing, for example, particular churches such as in Africa and other places, to do what best reflects the community they're in. And this is because the challenge of the Pope is to be a pontifex, bridge builder. And he's not just representing the thoughts and reflections and changes in society that might be happening in the United States and Italy and France or in Germany. They're happening in other parts of the world too. And so if something is really, really important in Italy, for example, or in Spain, that might not be the top priority for those in Africa or in parts of Asia. And Francis had his own list of priorities, and that was the poor first and foremost. Whatever they needed had to be done first. And then
Claire,
afterwards came the other thing.
yeah,
Sorry, I was long-winded.
No. But you said something really important that I want to go back to, and I want to ask you and Father Tom also and Aleja to weigh in. You said that Pope Francis was a traditional Catholic. Is there anyone in this conclave who is not? Like, is there any possibility that there wouldn't be a traditional Catholic as the next Pope?
My wording probably using the best. No, go ahead.
I would just say there are a few that I would say are maybe more open to LGBTQ people and women compared to Pope Francis. I think Pope Francis didn't show any real openness to having women as deacons. We're not really at a point where there's a serious conversation about women as priests. But I believe there are a few cardinals who've shown some openness to women as deacons. There are a few cardinals who have made stronger statements in favor of a different pastoral posture towards LGBTQ people. I don't think some of those people don't really have a real shot, as far as I understand. But I do think with this question, it's helpful. One of my sources has just an interesting analysis of this. Gay theologian Brian Flanagan with New Ways Ministries has always talked about how the church moves in centuries, but also that the job of the Pope, even if the Pope is breaking his heart as a gay man, is to keep the church together. And so, regardless of what the Pope might think or feel about how the church's position should be, that his role is to not move faster than he can move the whole church together, right? So if only one part of the church is ready for a change, it's not time yet.
I'd
Father
like
Tom,
to-
oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I'd just like to reemphasize something that Claire said. And what's really different about this Pope than the past two popes is that he has allowed discussion of these issues, even where he doesn't agree with, say, what some theologian is saying. During the last two papacies, if a seminary professor wanted to talk or write about women priests or something like that, he'd be fired. Today, the Pope says, go ahead, because he believes that that's the way theology develops, is through this conversation and research and discussion. And that you have to have that before
So do you think that could change? Like, do you think that's sort of like out of the bag now and this discussion will continue?
Not in my lifetime, but I think, you can hardly say never in the Catholic Church.
We have a question about continued support for survivors, and I just wanted to ask someone to weigh in on that.
I think Aleja has done some tremendous reporting on this in the past few days.
Yeah. I mean, certainly survivor advocates and survivors themselves have been speaking really loudly about which cardinals they see as not who shouldn't be eligible for the papacy based on their records on handling sexual abuse. In terms of the cardinals who will actually be participating in the conclave, as far as I'm aware, none of them are accused of having done sexual abuse themselves, but plenty of them are accused of mishandling sexual abuse cases. And so I think it's been interesting as Claire and I work on reporting, kind of evaluating Pope Francis's legacy on sexual abuse. It's interesting seeing all the different perspectives where some people say he was amazing, he went so far, and other people say he didn't do nearly enough. Here are the ways he failed. Here are all the people he hurt. And so I think it will really be a matter of perspective when we're evaluating the next candidate, whether, where your goalpost is. And I think there are certainly some high profile candidates that people will be upset or survivor advocacy groups will be upset with if they are elected. Paroline has been one of those people, specifically the group Bishop Accountability has raised the fact that when as Secretary of State, he failed to turn over or chose not to, I guess would probably be the correct wording, turn over documents about sexual abuse to civil authorities in multiple countries when they asked. And so Bishop Accountability has said that should mean he can't be elected. And I guess we'll have to see how cardinals take all of their input when they're voting.
So we just have a few minutes left. I'm afraid I don't think we're going to be able to get to every single question here, but I want to end by asking you all, just in the final few minutes that we have, what you all are what you're preparing for in the next 24 to 48 hours, what you are going to be watching for, what you suggest to all of us and I think everyone who is participating in this are keenly interested in this. What should we be looking for? Father Tom, can I start with you?
Yes, I'm looking forward to being surprised, I think, by the results. Maybe I won't be, who knows? But if Cardinal Paroline is not elected quickly, then I think all bets are off and we may be surprised. I also am going to wait before I pass judgment on whoever becomes the new Pope. Because one of the things we don't know about these cardinals is how much, all of them were pretty much publicly loyal to Pope Francis, but was that out of loyalty and out of duty, or was it out of commitment? So, we may elect somebody and we think, oh, he's a progressive, great. And then he turns out to be a conservative. Or we may elect somebody who we think is conservative and he turns out to be a progressive, which is exactly what happened with Pope Francis.
Yeah.
Everybody thought he was a conservative when he was elected. John Paul II was exactly the opposite. They thought he was a progressive and he turned into a conservative. So my advice is wait 6 months before you decide what you think about the Pope.
Aleja, I'm going to let you go next, and then we'll let Claire have the last word.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think I'm looking forward to when, we're waiting in the square for the smoke, just kind of feeling the atmosphere. This will be my first time being there. I think I'm looking forward to talking with people who are there in that moment of really intense hope about what it is that they're hopeful for. And I think it'll just be really interesting seeing how the people of the Catholic Church respond to this decision.
Claire?
I didn't want to jump in. The thing is that Tom took my thoughts from my head, so now I'm
That's
trying to
okay.
figure out. But the truth is, yes, I mean, for me, it all starts over again, and figuring out who this guy is and what his priorities are and what he cares about and how is it different from the last pope and the one before that, and what is his vision for the church and how are people responding. I mean, there's so much excitement. It's getting me exhausted just to think about it. But I did want to just quickly reference to some of the questions you asked. You know, someone asked, for example, about the cardinals being ruled out for not knowing languages. There is Cardinal Aveline of Marseille, for example. He only speaks French and struggles with Italian. And so that's one example of someone not being taken before they enter the conclave as a real candidate for the papacy, even though he's considered a Francis ally. Some people I saw were talking about Prevost, the possibility of an American pope. And on this, I just want to say that it's never been more likely for an American to become pope in history. Or before, because they didn't really care what was happening on the other side of the planet. They only cared about what's happening in Italy. That's just the truth. But afterwards, because, you know, they didn't want the Pope to be closely associated with the global superpower. But as dynamics change and things are shifting and moving, as we know, you know, an American Pope is not completely impossible. And Prevost is a name that's being heard over here a lot. So yes, definitely a possible candidate. And I wish I could have answered more questions because that's what I love to do. But thank you
Well, we
so
got
much.
to a lot of them, and you just answered like 3 right there, which was great. So thank you so much. I know all 3 of you have been so busy, and we really appreciate you taking the time to meet with all of these RNS folks and talk about everything. Father Tom Reese, Claire Giangravé, Aleja Hertzler-McCain. Just a reminder that on May 20th, we are going to be doing another virtual event where we'll be talking about religious lawsuits filed against the Trump administration. Our guests are going to be Presiding Bishop of the Episcopal Church, Sean Rowe, Director of the Latino Christian National Network, the Reverend Carlos Malave, and Director of the Law, Rights, and Religion Project at Columbia Law, Elizabeth Rayner Platt. The link for registration for that is in there. If you're not following RNS on social media, please be sure to do so. We will add these links here, and don't forget to sign up for our newsletters to get the latest religious news right in your inbox and read more of the reporting from Father Tom and Claire and Aleja. Thank you guys. This has been really a great hour, well, not even less than an hour, but talking about all of this. I appreciate it.
Thank you guys for listening.
Bye-bye.
Yes, thank you all.